running to the pit lane here on F1 TV for free practice 3.
Hello again, everyone. It is qualifying Saturday here at Zandvoort. We are just outside of central Amsterdam at a venue which saw F1 engines fall silent for 36 long years. But this is the 4th year in a row we've made the trip to the Dutch Grand Prix. We are on the banks of the North Sea, in between the sand dunes and a circuit that doesn't really give the drivers a moment to rest. Later on, we'll have an hour of qualifying to set the grid for the Dutch Grand Prix, but this is the last practice session for the drivers to make those crucial tweaks. We're looking at the circuit, one of the shorter circuits of the season. 14 turns, we'll have 72 laps on Sunday, 2.6 miles, 4.2 kilometers. It's the full array of tyres on the graphic because it has continued to rain. We have the intermediates available and the wets, the soft, the medium and the hard, all used yesterday. All of the tyres in your picture used yesterday on the Friday. So we've gone back to where we started the weekend in reality. You can see the North Sea fairly aggressive down there. It was a very wet and windy walk to the circuit, but it is going to be a weekend to enjoy now. Not sure how much action the fans in the grandstands are going to see, but we will keep our eyes out, because if it does abate, the rain, it does dry up rather quickly here. In the commentary box, I'm Alex Jakes, delighted to be joined once again by Jolyon Palmer.
And we're back to FP1 conditions, aren't we? Windy, it is raining once again, and the track is really very wet right now. So is this going to stay around for the whole day? It's going to be a question for all of the teams. It's definitely unpredictable throughout the afternoon as well, so they're going to want to get some intermediate running in. It's going to be a slow start, I'm sure. Lewis Hamilton looks fairly relaxed. We had a decent day in dry conditions yesterday in the Mercedes. I'm not expecting it to be a rush out of the garage, but I am expecting some wet laps anyway.
George Russell was fastest at the end of practice Friday yesterday in FP2. We had a mixed session for FP1, and he said it could change again dramatically. So Mercedes, I think, were very happy with the start of their day, but wary and mindful that the picture has changed all the way through. Just think back to the last Grand Prix that we ran, when we all expected Max Verstappen to come steaming through the field, or a McLaren to win the Grand Prix, and it was Lewis Hamilton who stepped forward. You're looking at Carlos Sainz, the Williams-bound driver for next year, completing his final 10 races at Ferrari, a stint that's seen him win some classic Grand Prix along the way.
This weather is not what Carlos Sainz wanted. Maybe it is if it stays wet later on, but he missed most of the dry running in FP2, gearbox issue that he had on his first run in yesterday's afternoon session. And then he's on the back foot, and Charles Leclerc was not particularly enamoured with Ferrari's performance either. He was languishing down in the bottom end of the top 10. Ferrari have plenty to do, and Sainz certainly would have loved just a clear, dry run to dial in. Because even if we're expecting unpredictable weather, there's rain around all afternoon, it might dry up. We saw yesterday how quickly it can dry. Tomorrow's race looks like it will be dry. Maybe gusty, but dry. So someone like Carlos Sainz might enter the race with barely any dry knowledge.
You can see that there are puddles on the racetrack. So we're just zooming out. I hope it's not going to turn into Guess the Barrier, but there we go. Plenty of fans on the dunes, carving up your own seat there. We'll put 1 hour on the clock. We have a green light at the end of the pit lane. No takers at this stage of the session. And there is said green light and an empty pit lane at the moment. So we had a really intriguing FP2. The one thing that struck me in FP2 is how old school this track is. The camera positions are close. The circuit is undulating. You're looking at turn 1 Tarzan corner, and then turn 3 with the banking, and the most distinctive corner on the racetrack, turn 14 with the high degree of banking, double that for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So these are the live pictures of the circuit. Green light at the end of the pit lane. George Russell, fastest driver yesterday, just jumping in. Will Buxton's making his way outside the Mercedes garage, just having a look down there at what's happening. And we've got the Mercedes driver ready to head out there on the circuit. Just give you the order if you weren't with us yesterday. It was George Russell, Oscar Piastri, Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, our top 5 at the end of the qualifying simulation runs.
The obligatory foot wipe for George Russell as he gets in. Make sure your feet aren't slipping on the pedals, having walked round to the garage. Make sure you've got full control. There's not too far your feet can go, especially if you're someone of the size of George Russell as well. There's never a huge amount of spare space down in the footwell, but Russell nonetheless doing the obligatory foot wipe. And Hulkenberg looks like he's going to be the first driver to be released onto the circuit in these conditions. Now, he was a driver that really struggled yesterday. Had flashes of pace, but also found the wall at turn 1 and found many a gravel trap in the first practice as well. The team confirmed it was just a gust of wind and a bit too much brake pressure for Nico in yesterday's dry afternoon session that spat him off into the wall. But he's in the similar boat as Carlos Sainz. Kevin Magnussen had decent pace in the Haas. Overall, the competitive picture looked okay for them, but Hulkenberg is on the back third, and he's trying to get some mileage straight away in this one.
Wonderful sweeps to begin the lap. It's always a moment of brinkmanship as you head to turn number 7 on the opening tour of the Grand Prix. 72 laps for the drivers tomorrow. Great view into turn 8, one of the corners that Hulkenberg was discovering the gravel at. There's a couple of corners where if you do go off, you've got to rejoin via the escape road, and that is one of them as he makes his way through. And we're now on board with his teammate as we send it from the commentary box to the pit lane and say good morning to Will Buxton.
Good morning, Alex. Good morning, folks. Very different conditions today down in pit lane as compared to yesterday during free practice 1. Yesterday, the rain was coming in sideways. The wind absolutely howled, and it was almost like the rain was coming up on the floor at one point. It's not raining today, but the big difference is it's calm. The wind has almost entirely dropped down to nothing, and that will change everything for the drivers out on track, just in terms of the consistency of the conditions, not getting those gusts of wind coming down into the corners. As you said, Alex, one of those gusts really catching Nico Hulkenberg out at turn 1 and pitching him across the gravel. The difficulty for them all, though, is the fact that the rain is coming and going. It was raining just 5 minutes ago. In fact, about 2 minutes ago as we were walking here to the pit lane. Now it's stopped and it's completely dry, but for the wet circuit. But we're expecting the rain to really sporadically come on and off all the way through this session. We are down here, though, at Mercedes. You were pointing to George Russell getting into his car earlier. We may have got an unintended confirmation on who his teammate will be for next season, as Toto Wolff seemingly letting it slip yesterday in an interview that Kimi Antonelli will indeed be in that car. We're expecting confirmation of it officially relatively soon. But Mercedes certainly have returned from the summer break with the bit between their teeth. Looked very competitive yesterday on their qualifying runs. But it's the race pace that I think is fascinating here this weekend, particularly when you look at the dry run and the fact that the Grand Prix itself may be dry. McLaren's Lando Norris looking impeccable, around half a second the advantage that he had on medium tyres on his race run.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buxton. Yeah, I think we can expect news about George Russell's teammate in the next couple of days, I suspect, as we build up to the Italian Grand Prix.
It's quite exciting having... I mean, a lot of people are jury out on Antonelli. He's had not a Formula 2 season with a plum that a lot of people expected. Nonetheless, he's been ahead of Ollie Behrman in the same team. He's won a couple of races now.
Yeah, we all set up,
stronger
boys.
as the season's gone on. It seems that Mercedes have just always wanted to promote
makes dropper like
and
some was
they've
watching.
lacked Carlos Sainz would have been a viable alternative, but they haven't found Verstappen, who would be the guy to sign for 25. Verstappen's going to stay at Red Bull. Antonelli comes in, and there's an level of risk promoting someone with 1 year of Formula 2, no Formula 3 experience. It's a bold move from Mercedes. I'm quite excited for it. To see a rookie come in a race-winning car, it's pressure, but in a way, the expectation probably won't be so high because, you know, he's such a young rookie. Yes, he's going to find the gravel.
Luckily, that's the glued down
That was
part of the gravel track
close
that Piastri went
call for
through.
Piastri.
Not even a pebble came up, did it? It's so impressively glued down, that part. Yeah, I'm trying to think when the last driver that came straight into a race-winning team was.
Yeah, this is you bring this up in practice a lot, and this is always the bit where I'm like, right, try not to forget anyone absolutely obvious. But you don't often get a chance. If you think of Mercedes' resurgence, since they updated that front wing, unlocked total performance of the car, suddenly they look like the Mercedes of old, who have an opportunity every single time that we come to a Grand Prix circuit. They had a good day yesterday. I'm intrigued with what you say, though, because at the start of the year, if they were the 3rd or 4th fastest team, throwing Antonelli into a team that might have a chance of 7th or 8th is one thing. Throwing Antonelli into a team that would be expected to win Grand Prix, another thing entirely. Ruth, we were talking yesterday in practice about the part you've played in driver assessments when giving that information to those who take the decisions based on the data. Mercedes have been running Antonelli plenty of times to accumulate some of that data. They must see something in that private testing that gives them the confidence that he can cope with being an 18-year-old rookie expected to make Q3 every week.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the system that's used at Mercedes, you know, one would infer that it is similar to the system that JV, James Vowles, now team principal at Williams, when he was head of strategy there, and he is a numbers guy. So I would imagine, as we see a little bit of a moment there from Piastri, that it's going to be a numbers-driven decision. At least they're going to have some element into it. So I believe they're going to have some, you know, some of the testing numbers, because as you say, from what we've seen, you know, the numbers that we have available to us in F2, there isn't, you know, that overwhelming amount of data that, you know, a bit like you could see it with your Maxes, you know, your Georges and your Charleses in their junior series.
But it's interesting because he's run an old car for testing on predominantly private test days with just Antonelli running.
Yeah.
So I don't see how there's a metric for Mercedes to know what Hamilton or Russell would do in the same car. And you're talking 2 or 3 tenths making quite a big difference. You're saying Sergio Perez is struggling compared to Max Verstappen, but it could be half a second, it could be 3 tenths.
Mixed up
Even a couple of
like
tenths could be 2 or
and
3
Sub was
rows.
watching.
So they just have got faith in
Yeah,
the
she
guy,
is
I think,
fastest
more
with
than
the
any
only
pure
one
metric.
setting her
I
time
think they've just got
with a
faith when he's got the talent. And it's got a good
124.176.
comparison because we know Ollie Behrman is a
By
solid
the way, that's
driver.
on an
They're both
intermediate time.
struggling compared to what we expected.
Alonso starting a flyer right now.
Serious powerhouse to the Formula 2 title this year, and they're both sort of floundering a little bit. But Mercedes obviously backing. I'm thinking,
A little bit of
obviously
traffic
Lewis
from
Hamilton,
Mercedes coming up.
2007,
No, that's a
straight in
Haas.
with McLaren.
Yep.
Won a race, what was it, 6 races into
Both
his,
the
into his
Mercedes
career.
still in
Got a
play.
podium on debut. The other one
Looks
that I'm then
composed to
harping
the
back to is
nothing too
Jacques
much, the
Villeneuve
rear not
in
slipping or not.
97, 96,
Calm and composed.
and
What
was
is
leading on
spring
debut.
out?
Should have won that race.
And
probably the car.
that's
Should have done.
4 tenths down
And
on the
I
first
cannot think of anyone before or after or in between. I am probably missing an absolute howler, but even Verstappen was Toro Rosso, Leclerc was Sauber, Raikkonen was Sauber, Alonso went
That's
to
compared
Minardi.
Stroll to this.
You know, the list
Stroll
goes on.
setting a
Ricciardo came in at
fastest first
HRT.
sector. So looking more
Barely
composed with the
anyone
car compared
gets
to
a shot
Alonso
straight
right
with a
now.
race-winning team. So it is fairly uncharted territory.
It's going to be exciting. What do you make of it, Will Buxton?
I'm so looking
One
forward to
second
it.
off
I think what's really
Alonso
telling with
of
Mercedes,
Piastri.
as you guys have been saying, is the faith they've had in Antonelli. Even before they were running him in the car this year, when you think about how Lewis Hamilton's departure from the team came about, it was because the team only offered him a 1+1, a 7-time world champion, possibly one of the greatest drivers this sport has ever seen. They wanted to give him a 1+1 rather than a 2-year contract because they were waiting on Antonelli as Hulkenberg finds the wall. Again, I'm just hearing,
Hulkenberg
guys.
finds the
But
wall.
yeah, I think that's fascinating. I think what they've seen from him in their private running has clearly been
There's
very,
the
very
wing stuck
good.
inside below the car.
I just wonder who his teammate will be with 26 and onwards. I want to talk still about Verstappen for those, but I'll get it back to you because I understand Hulkenberg has gone off.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. We'll revisit this, I imagine, in about a week's time. Hulkenberg finds himself off again. This is a guy who everyone in the paddock respects his core ability. This is one of the messiest weekends I can ever remember him having in Formula One. That's his fifth off.
Yeah.
Across the weekend.
3, at least that we saw in FP1, all at different corners. Then he went back off at Tarzan in FP2, hit the wall. This one is at turn 11, which is one of his FP1 offs, and they are all on the brakes. And that is what I imagine this is as well. He's gone straight on and found it to the wall at turn 11, straight on. This is the corner Piastri was going deep in, where they glued down the gravel, but obviously Hulkenberg's gone through that, mashed the nose, the front wing.
Let's go back down to the pit lane. Will Buxton's at Haas.
Almost. As I saw Nico Hulkenberg drive past, I
Mixed
can
up
confirm
like
it is the
a
new
servo as
front
well.
wing, or what's left of the new front wing, because as you see from the nose, look at that. That's the new front wing, I believe. Or is that? No, that's the old one. That's the old one. Because that's the...
Yesterday, I touched the brake and it locked up.
So yeah, that's the old front wing, because you can see there the bottom element and the nose attached to the first element above that, the new front wing. The nose was attached all the way to the bottom. So fortunate there, perhaps for Nico Hulkenberg, that it wasn't the new front wing, but yeah, the old one. Not a lot left of that.
Thank you, Will. Good speed for this time of day in these type of conditions. From one Haas to another. This is Kevin Magnussen going deeper to turn 1, taking that escape road that the race director tells you that you must to rejoin. But Hulkenberg with a fundamental issue on the brakes as we look at Magnussen going deeper to turn 1.
Nice drop on
Fernando
like
Alonso
going
going deep. Is that turn 11? Turn 11, 12? Yeah.
T11, which I don't know if it's got a cool name. Does anyone know what
It probably does have a cool
probably
name,
does have a
but
cool name. I mean, Tarzan's still my favourite.
Tarzan's turn number 1. And then we've got Hugenholtz, which is turn number 3. And then, what have we got? Skyflacker, turn 7.
And Ari,
Yeah.
Dutch two-time Indianapolis winner, is the name of the turn 14. And the banking in turn 14 is double the banking of the Indianapolis 500 corner.
We're on board with Lando Norris. Fantastic camera. Jolyon Palmer's going to talk us around.
It's the Hans Ernst Bocht, turn 11 and 12. That is not where Norris is coming up to right now. This is Hugenholtz, named after the legendary track designer. And now we come up through the Hunterrug, turn 4, Slottermatterbocht at turn 6, and now Skyflack, the quick right at turn 7. This is my favourite corner. It's lovely, dropping to the apex, rising over the crest into Mustersbocht, the next right-hander, and then Bocht 9. Turn 9. I don't think it's got a name, this one.
I'm sure it has.
Turn 10, the left-hander. This was really slippery yesterday. A struggle for everyone in all conditions, with the wind just whipping up as it channels between the dunes that you can see now either side. Now we're coming up to turns 11 and 12. Hans Ernst Bocht. Easy to skip through the gravel. We see Piastri do it. We see Hulkenberg and Alonso go through there as well. But Norris is finding a bit more grip, struggling for traction. Up to the final couple of corners. Here we go. The Ari Leyendijk Bocht. Flat out, easy in dry conditions. And then maybe just tempering the throttle slightly. We've got a yellow flag in sector 1. Is that going to be someone off at turn 1 again?
Yeah, it's Russell, I think, went deep. We'll cut back to the replay in a moment. That's a lap of Zandvoort. Nice and quickly. There is George Russell recovering to the racetrack. And, oh, that's a massive crash. That is a huge accident. Surely for, is that one of the Williams? I think it is. Logan Sargent has hit the barrier. Huge accident. Red flag is out. And after one, well, cars have been going off, but he has dropped that in an unusual part of the circuit. And fire at the back of the car for Sargent. He's okay. That is the relieving thing, because huge amount of commitment. Let's get him out of that car. And session is red flagged. You are committing a lot of speed at that part of the circuit, in the dry, in the wet, and we've seen cars go off there in Formula 2 in the past, but I can't remember an F1 car hitting the barrier at that part of the circuit. Session is halted, cars heading back to the pit lane, and that is the most important thing to see. Logan Sargent is clear of the car, currently on fire.
Yeah, a little bit of it shaken up, and you can see just propping himself up against the barrier. That's a big hit that he's had. That should be a flat out section coming out at turn 3 all the way up to turn 7, and you see the crests, the curves in the road. It's not an easy flat out stretch, particularly when it's damp and there's wind.
That's a
around.
big crash.
It's a
for
narrow
Logan,
circuit as well, and Logan first of all would have been shaken up, not expecting to be dropping the car at that point on the circuit, and then as he's on the radio collecting his thoughts, suddenly there's smoke bellowing out from behind you, and you just think, let's hop out pretty quickly. Thankfully he has, and he's the other side of the barrier now, as the marshals will take a bit of time to recover this one.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit of an interruption. Opening session of this qualifying Saturday at the Dutch Grand Prix. The fans flocking towards that part of the circuit. The marshals very quickly on the scene. But Williams going, there's work to do down there as Sargent, the American driver, out of the car. But that is not ideal, to say the least. And where was he? He had set a personal best out there, so he had gone out and gone 5th fastest. This is the moment then. Logan Sargent's coming out of turn 3. We're on board with him. Oh, and he never gets off the curb on the exit of turn 3, and straight to the scene of the accident.
Yeah, he's fighting the traction all the way. It's turn 4, but it's really coming from the exit of turn 3. He's on the grass. It reminds me slightly. Oh, crunch! It reminds me slightly of his crash in Suzuka practice last year, where he's on the exit of the Dunlop curve, the left-hander going up the hill, and he just drops it onto the grass. He's always fighting the car, and he keeps his foot in onto the grass, and then has a big smack in a practice session. And this one is a similarly big impact, maybe even bigger there on a section of track. I've not seen a crash in Formula 1, but it all comes from that exit, running the curb, losing the car a bit, keeping his foot in, finding the grass, which is more slippery still with the moisture there. Spun up the rear tyres, all from the exit, and this is the part here.
So there you go, because the paint is the modern high grip paint, so in the wet it wouldn't be brush a white line and spin like you used to see 30, 20 years ago in Formula 1. It's that tyre on the curb on the exit of 3.
Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm good. Okay. You okay? That's what matters. Car is on fire, mate. Car is on fire, so you should jump out. Jump out, car is on fire at the rear of the car.
And even if they do manage to work on that car, it's very unlikely we'll see him for the rest of today, because there's a rule that's intended for safety, 31.4, which means if you have to change the chassis, the survival cell, which does look damaged at the moment because of that fire, it has to be the next day. So he may get the ability to start the race if the stewards feel like they can, but it's unlikely we're going to see him in qualifying this afternoon.
There's definitely a chassis change there for Sargent. That's a destroyed car. So 19 for qualifying, we can assume.
We've yet to see times in the session for Hulkenberg, who went off the road and damaged the front wing of the Haas. We haven't seen Joe Sainz, who's really going into qualifying on the back foot after losing half of FP2 yesterday to a gearbox issue. Neither Yuki Tsunoda, Pierre Gasly, Ocon,
That's a huge
Charles
crash,
Leclerc in the other Ferrari, and 2 Red Bulls of Verstappen, Perez, and 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton haven't put a time on the board. Verstappen, Perez, and Hamilton haven't even done an installation lap for their qualifying Saturday. If you're just pressing play, great to have your company on F1 TV. We are interrupted. Red flag out after Logan Sargent has found the barriers, and Will Buxton has made his way to Williams in the pit lane.
I think you guys are absolutely spot on about the fact we're going to have 19 cars for qualifying. Of course, you're not allowed to start preparing the spare chassis until you've had agreement from the FIA that you can do so, and they can't start to do that until they've started to disassemble what remains of Logan Sargent's car when they get that back into the garage. Otherwise, it's considered that you have 2 cars on that one side of the garage. What is also going to be really disappointing for Williams this weekend is all of the time, the effort, the money that has gone into a massive upgrade package on the car that they were running this weekend, particularly around the floor and the diffuser, one of the most, if not the most important aerodynamic part of a modern day Formula 1 car. That looks to have been absolutely trashed in that accident along with the engine cover as well. That's a brand new part on the car this weekend. So much that the team has put into this, a team that can ill afford to be wasting money, to be wasting parts with an accident like that. Obviously, Logan being okay is the most important thing here, but for a team like Williams, that kind of an accident will have more ramifications than simply him just missing qualifying. Sam Collins back in the studio. I know you're taking a look.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I mean, I'm just looking at the car out on track, still smouldering away, but I thought we'd take a look back at that accident and just cover off some of those elements that Will was talking about, that the team are going to have to get fixed. Now, teams are able to build up their spare cars a little bit more than they used to be able to. There was a rule change earlier this year for exactly this situation, but Logan Sargent has done a pretty comprehensive job on the rear end of that Williams. Perhaps fortunately for the Williams team, some of the big upgrades like that new roll hoop, they're further forward on the car and they may not have been too heavily damaged, but pretty much every corner, every bit of bodywork on that car is going to have to be replaced. I'm just going to pause this when we see the rear end of the car coming towards us, because then we can just do a little bit of accounting on what's actually been broken on that car. So we can see on the front end, the front suspension on both sides is broken. That's going to have to be replaced. New wheels, new suspension, probably the new inboard components on that. Then as Sargent brings the car around us to see the side, we can see the cooling system here in the side pod. That's been completely destroyed. Now, Williams didn't revise that with the upgraded package, so they will have plenty of spares there. What they won't have a lot of spares for is the new side pods that were fitted to the car at the start of the weekend. Williams upgrading both of its cars. Then you can look round at the rear of the car as the car rotates around a little bit more, and you can see incredibly clearly both sides of the rear suspension completely destroyed. The gearbox is non-existent because it hit the wall, and that's exactly what it's supposed to happen. It's been completely trashed there. I think the power unit itself may have suffered some pretty severe damage. You may see the exhaust have to be changed out as well. So really substantial damage. And as Will pointed out, you can see the new engine cover. Well, that's been completely shattered as well. Not clear if Williams have any spares of that component either. But then as I move on and then look at the roll hoop here, just behind the driver's head, that's intact. Now that's the new part of the Williams chassis that they upgraded for this weekend. And crucially, the monocoque section, unless there's been some damage low down by the fuel cell, that section will have survived pretty intact, so the team may not need to change the chassis, but the front suspension damage could enforce that chassis change. But it's easier to build up a spare chassis with the old specification parts than it is to build up the new specification parts. As you can see that crash again on the screen, it's pretty impressive, that level of accident. But Williams, if Sargent has to revert to the old specification car, they will see a performance differentiation as the car goes around the circuit. That's what I have my little red book out here. Williams' upgraded car has given them a significant performance increase in the corners, particularly low and medium speed corners. The Williams is looking quite good now. But that's unusual for Williams because previously for Williams, we've always seen them very good down the straights, the high speed sections. But this upgraded car doesn't have that performance characteristic. If Sargent has to revert to the old specification car, he's going to have to go for the car that works really well in low drag conditions. And that's something that is a bit of a change for Williams. But up and down the field, we're seeing some different performance characteristics from different cars. This is all based on yesterday's dry running rather than the wet running we saw yesterday morning and so far today, possibly even into qualifying this afternoon, because tomorrow in the race we're expecting dry conditions. Well, Red Bull are quite an interesting case here. They're incredibly quick in the corners, particularly the slow speed corners, turn 3, turn 12. They're looking very, very good indeed. However, Red Bull are one of the slowest cars in the field down the straights. And that says to me that Red Bull have got that power unit turned down quite significantly. We're used to seeing that, and I think there's a lot more to come from Max Verstappen at one of his 2 home Grand Prix. Then the other factor we need to look at is McLaren. Now, McLaren have got an interesting setup on the car. They are extremely quick in a straight line. They ain't so good in a corner, which means it's a very raceable car. They're going to be able to fight for positions during a Grand Prix where it's known to be difficult to overtake. So they may have a slight advantage over Red Bull if the turned up Honda power unit doesn't deliver that performance. One team, though, that is worth mentioning is Ferrari. Ferrari are not looking good particularly anywhere. They're the slowest of anybody down the straights based on yesterday's data. Overall pace similar to Haas, well, when Haas isn't breaking down or crashing into the wall at one of the corners. But also Ferrari are terrible in the corners, so that car, that red car, isn't working particularly well anywhere around the circuit. Mercedes, they're looking pretty good pretty much everywhere on the track. Not exceptional anywhere, but pretty decent all the way around. They are a threat for a race win. They are looking very, very good. Then Haas, again, similar situation to Ferrari. They're okay sort of everywhere. They're not suffering anywhere. They are looking competitive. RB also looking quite good in the corners, not so good on the straights. Similar characteristics to Red Bull, but in a slightly less aggressive situation, so they're not going to be as strong. Aston Martin not looking wonderful anywhere on the circuit. They've got a bit of work to do. And Sauber and Alpine, well, unfortunately, I think they might as well pack up and go home. They are looking awful on the straights and in the corners, and there don't seem to be any redeeming features for either of those cars. But I have put them in my fantasy lineup because I don't think I'm going to lose any points for overtaking position. Will, back to you, or commentary, back to you.
Thank you very much, Sam Collins. I'm intrigued with his fantasy strategy of putting in teams that he thinks might as well go home in the team.
That's a very negative strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, might explain where he is in the table. But there we go. All right, anything you'd like to disagree with there, Ruth?
First off, as a team member, a former team member of a team that consistently, you know, maybe did not necessarily get through Q1, I would like to say every car can get points on the Zandvoort track. I went from the very, very back to P2 last year, and I feel personally victimised by anyone insinuating that just because you maybe don't have the fastest car, all cars matter, okay? All cars matter. And that has enraged me so much that I've completely forgotten what we were saying about performance of the cars, which should be the thing. So I would say from FP2, one of the most interesting points in the dry was that actually the car that was the slowest in the low-speed corners was a team that we didn't mention should pack up and go home, Ferrari, which is actually one of the most interesting points, I thought, because it's been a long time since we've actually seen them being, you know, P10 in any kind of ranking.
Frustrating for them. Charles Leclerc, after that man was disqualified from the Belgian Grand Prix, scoring his first podium since winning his home race. But Ferrari really struggling yesterday. Sainz losing time with a gearbox issue, and Charles Leclerc very downbeat about their prospects for the rest of the weekend. And it looks like a 3-team battle rather than a 4-team battle this weekend.
I think Alpine will be a little bit miffed at being told to pack up and go home. Gasly was 14th yesterday. He was within a 10th of the top 10.
This is Gasly, who was on the podium.
He was on the podium last year. Alpine have got they didn't have the easiest of days, it's fair to say. Gasly had an interrupted FP1, but they're in a close fight, aren't they? The interesting thing, I think, as the season wears on, is Sauber and how they've got no points this year. They're another of Sam's pack up and go home teams. They are obviously struggling a little bit, and they were further down, no points. Do you know how many times in the last 10 seasons a team has finished with no points?
I do, but I feel like we should ask this question to Jakesy.
I'm going to have a longer guess because I've been told to throw to Will Buxton. Go on, Will.
Logan's car's just gone past us. That's probably about as fast as it's going to go for the remainder of the weekend. We'll see what we can see now is down here, and before they throw a tarp over it, let's have a little look, Olivier, because I'm sure the team won't be too happy with us getting a look at it. Oh dear, that fire has really done in for the back end of the car there. You see the smouldering remains of what was the brand new engine cover, and Olivier, you can see right there at the rear what remains of the diffuser, what remains of the floor, and it's reversing back, so we'll get out of the way there, and that will stop the team from putting the tarp on it as well. Just the smouldering remains there. So yeah, that new floor, that new engine cover, an awful lot of damage having been done in that accident to the car. We're not going to see a lot more now because the team obviously trying to cover it up, but from what we can see of the car, that is not just a huge job, but a huge expense, and those lovely, shiny, brand new upgrades, yeah, put them straight in the skip.
Thank you, Will. Not a great day for Logan Sargent and Williams. Tough for them, and you saw the reaction from the mechanics down there. This was one of the